The heat in Deadwood made men mean that summer. It baked the mud between wagon tracks into cracked skin and pressed down until something decent finally broke. Flour burst white across the streetboards as the sack hit the ground. The woman carrying it was on her knees before the sound finished echoing. 3 pairs of boots closed in around her. Windows watched from across the street. No one came out. A 4th set of boots stepped into the dust and stopped. Old leather, scuffed. The left heel worn lower than the right. They planted themselves directly in front of her. The man above them said nothing. He only looked at the hand still hovering near her arm. The leader's grin died. "This ain't your business, old-timer," the stranger answered without raising his voice. 4 words. Flat. Already finished, nobody touches her again. The bad piano inside the Golden Spur kept playing a hoarse, blue air at the trough. But the air between the men had gone still as a held breath. The woman on the ground slowly lifted her head. Deadwood, Dakota Territory. Summer, 1878. The heat came early that year. Not the kind that makes you sweat. The kind that makes you mean. The kind that bakes the mud between wagon tracks into something that looks like cracked skin. The kind that sits on your chest at noon and reminds you this land never really belonged to anybody. It just tolerates you for a while. The day of Deadwood smelled like whiskey and sawdust and something else underneath. Something older. The kind of smell that comes from too many men making too many decisions they can't take back. The Golden Spur Saloon had a piano. Somebody was playing it badly. Not badly enough to stop. Just badly enough that everybody inside had given up hoping it would get better. That was Deadwood in the summer of 1878, alive enough to be loud, tired enough not to care. Ruby Graves was 20 years old, and she was already running out of mornings like this one. She had come into town for flour. Simple as that. Flour and maybe some salt pork if Eddington's store still had any left. After the supply wagon from Pierre ran 2 days late again. She had her father's old canvas sack over one shoulder, his handwriting still on the side of it. Cal Graves. 2 letters, C and G, written in the crooked way he always wrote when his hand hurt. She didn't look at the writing. Not today. She kept her head down the way she'd learned to keep it down. Chin tucked, eyes on the boards, under her feet. The trick was to take up as little space as possible. Move fast. Don't give anybody a reason to notice. Except that was the problem with Deadwood. People noticed Ruby Graves whether she wanted them to or not. Not because she was pretty. Not because she was important. Because she was an easy target. And easy targets in a town like this one had a way of attracting the worst kind of attention. The lazy kind. The kind that happens not because somebody planned anything, but because the opportunity was just sitting there, and why not? She made it halfway down the main street before she heard the boots behind her. 3 sets. Heavy. Not hurrying. Not sneaking either. The kind of footsteps that don't bother being quiet because they already know nobody is going to stop them. She kept walking. Maybe they're going somewhere else. Maybe they're heading to the saloon. Maybe. Well, now. That voice. She knew that voice the way you know the sound of a loose board on your porch. The one you always forget about until your foot finds it in the dark. Boone Pritchard, 6'3". Shoulders like a barn door somebody forgot to hang straight. A grin that had never once in its life been friendly, no matter how wide it went. He worked for Cormac Desch, which in Deadwood meant he worked for everyone and answered to no one, which meant he could do just about anything he wanted on this street, and the only consequence was that people would talk about it quietly and then go back inside. Miss Graves, he said it like a joke, like her name was the punchline. Heading somewhere important? Ruby stopped walking. Don't turn around. Just keep going. But her feet had already stopped. That was the thing about fear. It didn't always make you run. Sometimes it just nailed you to the ground and left you standing there, trying to remember how your lungs worked. She turned around. Boone had 2 men with him. Callum Wretch on his left, a narrow, bird-faced man who always stood slightly behind whoever he was with, and Dex Hooper on the right. Younger. 20-something. The kind of young that thinks cruelty is the same as strength, because nobody's taught him the difference yet. Boone looked at her, the way men like him always looked at her, starting at the top, taking his time, working his way down, then back up again, slow enough to make sure she felt every second of it got something for you. He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, held it out. Mr. Desch thought you might have forgot about this. She knew what the paper was. She'd been pretending she didn't know what the paper was for 3 weeks now. Patri transfer notice, the Graves Ranch. Her land, her creek, her father's name with a line through it and Cormac Desch's name underneath, waiting for her signature the way a trap waits for a foot. I don't need to look at that, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Small miracle. Boone smiled wider. Sure you do. Your daddy's dead, sweetheart. Somebody's got to make decisions about that place now. Mr. Desch is just being neighborly, that word. She wanted to say something about neighborly, something sharp, something that would have made her father laugh, and then tell her she needed to watch her mouth. Something that would at least give her 1 second where she was the one with the advantage, but Boone was already moving closer, and the paper was already in her hand. And she didn't remember him putting it there. Just sign it, he said it quietly, almost gentle, which was somehow worse. Make this easy on yourself. Ruby looked down at the paper, her father's name, that line through it. Something cracked open in the middle of her chest, not loud, just a quiet split. The kind that happens when you've been holding something together for a long time, and you finally run out of whatever it was you were using to hold it. She folded the paper, handed it back. No, one word. Boone stared at her for a second. Like he wasn't sure he'd heard right, like he was genuinely surprised, which told her he'd never once expected her to say that word to him. Because nobody ever said that word to him. Then his face changed. The smile didn't go away exactly. It just turned into something else. Something that had never been a smile at all underneath. He grabbed her arm. Not the paper, not the bag, her arm. Right above the elbow. And pulled. Hard enough that she stumbled. Hard enough that the canvas sack hit the ground and split open and the flour she hadn't even bought yet scattered across the boards in a white cloud that hung in the air like something from a bad dream. She went down on one knee, the street around her, the boards, the dust, the sun. All of it tilting sideways, people were watching. She knew that, without looking up, she could feel it. The way you can feel eyes on the back of your neck, even when you can't see them. Windows, doorways. The barber shop across the street. A man pretending to read something on the notice board who hadn't looked at the notice board once. Watching, not moving, because this was Deadwood. And in Deadwood, Cormac Desch owned everything worth owning, which meant Boone Pritchard could stand in the middle of this street and do whatever he pleased. And the people who might have done something about it 3 years ago had already learned what happened when you tried. So they watched. And Ruby Graves was on one knee in the dirt, with flour on her dress and her arm hurting, and her eyes burning, and she would not cry. She had made herself that promise the morning she buried her father, and she was keeping it now, even if it killed her. She would not give Boone Pritchard a single tear. She pushed herself back up slow, one hand on her knee, legs shaking under her, back straight. Boone looked almost amused. Callum Retch laughed a little. Dex Hooper didn't laugh. He looked slightly sick, actually. But he didn't move either. Boone leaned down toward her, close enough that she could smell tobacco and something sour underneath. Last time I'm going to ask nice, he said. Sign the papers. Or next time Mr. Desch stops being patient. She looked at him. Right at him. Not at the ground. Not at the space over his shoulder. Right at his face. Tell Mr. Desch, she said quietly, that he can wait until the creek runs dry, which was the worst thing she could have said. She knew that. She said it anyway. Boone straightened up, that false smile all the way gone now. He reached out and shoved her shoulder. Hard, she went down again. Both knees this time, hands catching the boards, pain shooting up through her palms, the street in front of her face, the flower. A dead beetle near the edge of the board, the absurd specific detail of it, a dead beetle. Her whole life, falling apart, and she's looking at a dead beetle. She heard Callum Retch laughing, Boone, saying something. The words weren't landing right, like her ears had decided to start working at half speed. She got her hands under her, plilled up, and stopped, because there was a pair of boots on the boards in front of her that hadn't been there before. Old boots. Worn down at the heel on the left side more than the right, which meant the man standing in them carried himself slightly uneven. Trail dust on the leather, dark, scuffed. The boots of someone who had walked a very long way and wasn't particularly concerned about the condition they arrived in. She looked up. He wasn't tall, not the way Boone was tall. He wasn't broad, wasn't young, wasn't the kind of man you'd pull out of a crowd and say, there, that one. That's the dangerous one. He was maybe 45, maybe older. The kind of face that had been put through enough weather that it was hard to say exactly. Dark hat. Long coat, the color of old leather, faded almost to gray at the shoulders. A Winchester tied to the saddle of the horse he'd left near the water trough without hitching it. Like he didn't think he'd be long, he stood still. Just still. Looking at Boone Pritchard with an expression that could have meant anything or nothing. Like he was watching something mildly interesting on the other side of a very long field. Boone frowned. The hell are you looking at? The man didn't answer. He looked down at Ruby, just for a second. One look. Taking in the flower and the torn seam on her shoulder and the way her hands were pressed flat against the boards. Then back up at Boone. Then at the two men behind him. Still nothing. Boone's frown deepened. You deaf, old man? The man's eyes moved to Boone's hand, the hand that was still near Ruby's arm, and something shifted in the air. Not dramatic, not loud. No music swelled. The piano inside the Golden Spur didn't even stop. It kept going badly, same as before, but something changed, like the moment before a match touches a fuse. Everything perfectly still. You know what's coming. You still can't make yourself move. Boone opened his mouth to say something else. Nobody touches Torriger in 4 words, said the way you'd say the time of day to someone you passed on the road. Flat, certain. No anger in them, no heat. Just the absolute unshakable weight of a statement that isn't asking permission and isn't making a request and has already finished being a negotiation. Boone stared. Callum Retch stopped laughing, even Dex Hooper, who had been staring at the ground through most of this, looked up. 4 words from a man nobody in Deadwood had ever seen before. A man with trail dust on his boots and an old Winchester on a horse he hadn't even bothered to tie up. A man who still hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved toward anyone, hadn't touched his gun, hadn't needed to. Boone took a step forward, the kind of step meant to be intimidating, the kind that usually worked. The man watched him take it, didn't step back, didn't brace, just watched. The way you watch something you have already calculated and accounted for, and found not particularly worrying. There was a long moment, the kind that stretches, the kind where you can hear the flower settling in, somebody's horse breathing over by the rail and the distant, off-key piano, and your own heart if you're paying attention. Then Boone laughed, short, dismissive, the kind of laugh men like him used when they needed to make sure everyone watching still understood where they stood. This isn't your business, old-timer. It is now. Boone looked at his men, a look that said, "Can you believe this?" Then he looked back at the stranger, and something in his eyes shifted. Not fear, not exactly. More like recalibration. Like he was running through what he knew about this man, which was nothing, and what he knew about the look on this man's face, which was something he didn't quite have a name for, but recognized from deep in some instinctive place that didn't deal in logic. The place that had kept Boone Pritchard alive in enough bad situations to know when he was standing in front of another one. He looked at Ruby. Still on the ground. We'll finish this conversation later. He said it to her, but his eyes were on the stranger. He stepped back, 1 step, 2, turned, walked away. Callum Retch followed immediately. Dex Hooper hesitated for half a second, like there was something he wanted to say, and then he followed too. The sound of their boots faded into the rest of the noise. Ruby Graves looked up at the man standing in front of her. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching Boone's back until Boone went around the corner of the feed store and disappeared. Then his eyes went to the windows where people had been watching. The faces behind the glass that were already pulling back now that the spectacle was over. Then he looked down at her. He put his hand out, just his hand, palm up. No words attached to it. Ruby looked at it. The hand of a stranger, a man she'd never seen before in her life, who had just said 4 words and made Boone Pritchard walk away. Whose name she didn't know and whose horse was untied, and who had given her nothing except a hand held out in the absence of his boot on her back. She didn't take it. Not because she was ungrateful, because she'd gotten up on her own before. She'd been getting up on her own for 3 months, and she needed to know she could still do it. Needed that one thing. She pushed up off the boards and got to her feet. He didn't make a face about it, didn't pull back offended, just let his hand drop and stepped aside to give her room to stand. She dusted her dress off, picked up the empty canvas sack. Cal Graves. C&G, thank you, she said. She made it 2 words instead of a paragraph because 2 words was already harder than she'd expected. The man nodded once, looked back at the corner where Boone had disappeared. You live out here? The Graves Ranch, north of town. Creek property. He was quiet for a moment. Something passed across his face, but went by too fast to read. Calhoun Graves was your father. Not a question. Ruby went very still. You knew him. Long time ago. She looked at him properly then. The lines around his eyes. The way he stood with his weight slightly off the left knee. The hat he hadn't taken off. The coat he moved in. Like it was a second skin that had just happened to get old at the same rate he did. There was something in his face when he said her father's name. Not grief exactly. Not the fresh kind, anyway. The old kind. The kind that's been carried so long it's just part of how the body holds itself. He wrote to you, she said. Not a question either. 6 days ago, she looked away. Down the street, where the flour dust was already settling into the boards, and the town had gone back to its regular noise. Like nothing had happened at all. Like she hadn't just been on her knees in the dirt. Like they hadn't all been watching. He's gone, she said. 3 months now. The man looked at her. I know, he said. And the way he said it told her he'd known before he rode into Deadwood, that he'd ridden in knowing and still come. Which told her something about the letter her father had written. Something she wasn't ready to ask about yet. My name's Holt Calloway, the man said. She picked up the ruined sack. Ruby Graves, I know that too. Of course he did. She didn't invite him to the ranch. She just started walking to where her horse was tied and didn't say he couldn't come. Which wasn't the same thing as an invitation, but it wasn't a refusal either. He got his horse and followed at a distance that was respectful, without being distant, like someone who understood the difference between being present and crowding. They rode north out of Deadwood. The road ran through scrub grass and low hills. Gold, the afternoon light. Not beautiful gold, survival gold, the color of land that's been through 3 dry summers and is still here, out of pure stubbornness. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Ruby was used to silence. Her father had been a quiet man. The comfortable kind of quiet that comes from someone who thinks before they speak and doesn't feel the need to fill up every second with noise. She'd grown up knowing the difference between silence that was empty and silence that wasn't. This one wasn't. The man called Holt Calloway rode beside her, with his hands easy on the reins and his eyes on the road ahead and the hills on either side. Not looking around like a man enjoying the scenery. Looking around like a man checking. He did that without appearing to do it. Glanced left, glanced right, back behind them once, then forward again. Like breathing, she thought about saying something. Several somethings. in order. Who are you? What did my father's letter say? Why did you take 3 months to get here? Why does Cormac Desh keep sending men to my door? Why is it always going to get worse before it gets better? And how do I know it's going to get better at all? None of those came out. What came out was, how'd you know my father? Holt was quiet for a moment. The kind of moment that wasn't him deciding whether to answer. More like him deciding where to start. Abilene, he said, 1869. I was doing some work for a cattle outfit. Your father was running beef north out of Texas. He never mentioned Abilene. He never mentioned a lot of things. A pause. That was one of his better qualities. She glanced at him sideways. He was looking at the road. You've been riding for 6 days? About that. From where? Wyoming Territory. When I got his letter, he shifted his weight in the saddle. The left knee again. She noticed him do it the way you notice someone favor something, like he was used to the adjustment. Had made it so many times it had become automatic. Took me some time to get back to a post station where the rider could find me. He sent the letter before he died. Yes. How long before? Another pause. Longer this time. 3 weeks. He said 3 weeks. Ruby looked at the road. She did the math the way she'd been avoiding doing the math. Her father had written this letter 3 weeks before he died. He had known then. Known something. Known it well enough to reach out to a man he hadn't seen in how long? How long since you'd seen him? Holt looked at her. A real look, not the quick reading glances he'd been doing since they left town. A full look, the kind that has weight to it. 9 years, he said. The Graves Ranch appeared around the curve of the last hill, like something that had given up, trying to look presentable. It wasn't ugly. It was just tired. The main house was solid enough. Her father had built it right. Thick walls, good roof, a deep porch that faced west to catch the evening shade. But the fence on the north side had been leaning for 2 months, and she hadn't had the hands to fix it. The barn still had the black scorch marks from the fire. In April, the one that took the old storage section before she got the well bucket going fast enough. The cattle that were supposed to be in the south pasture were scattered near the creek instead because Gate the Gaunt latch had broken last week. And she hadn't fixed that either. Things break. You fix them or they stay broken. There are only so many hours and only one pair of hands. She'd been doing what she could. Holt rode in slowly. His eyes went around the property the same way they'd gone around the road. Taking inventory. The fence. The barn. The scatter of cattle. The creek to the north, running low but still running. The hills behind. He didn't say anything about the state of it, which she appreciated more than she expected to. She tied her horse at the post. He did the same, except he loosened the cinch the way someone does when they're not planning to ride in for a while. She noticed that, too. Inside, the house smelled like her father, or maybe she just thought it did. Maybe it smelled like dust and old wood and cold ash in the stove, and she just filled in the rest from memory. She didn't know anymore. She'd stopped being sure of what was real and what was her mind trying to hold on to something that wasn't there. She built a fire in the stove without asking if he wanted coffee. He sat at the table without being invited. It could have been awkward. Somehow it wasn't. Like the house already knew him. Even if she didn't, she brought coffee. Sat across from him. The table between them was her father's table. He'd made it himself from lumber left over from the house. Too big for 2 people. Always had been. Her father used to spread papers across the half she wasn't using. Maps, receipts, cattle records. Always some kind of papers. That table with no papers on it looked wrong in a way she couldn't explain. You going to show me the letter? She asked. Holt wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. Old hands. Scared at the knuckles. The kind of hands that had been put to work for a long time. He reached into his coat. The letter was folded small. The paper worn soft from travel. He unfolded it on the table between them and didn't hand it to her. Just let her read it where it lay, her father's handwriting. She had to take a breath before the words would come into focus. Holt, if this reaches you, then the thing I was afraid of has started moving. I don't have much time to write this right. I'll keep it short. There are men here who want my land. Not because it's good land, because of what's under it. I found it last winter. Didn't tell anyone. Registered it the right way in February. Put it in Ruby's name. She doesn't know yet. I was going to tell her when I was sure she'd be safe knowing. I'm not sure of that anymore. Desh is the name you need to know. Cormac Desh. He came here 3 years ago from. And then a word crossed out. Heavy. Like he'd pressed the pen hard. Then, I think you know where he came from. I think that's why you'll come. I'm not asking you to fight anyone. I'm asking you to make sure my daughter knows what she has and knows how to keep it. She can take care of herself. She always could. She just needs someone to stand next to her long enough for her to remember that. Come if you can, old friend. I'm sorry it's been 9 years. Cal Ruby read it twice. Then she sat back. She looked at the window. At the light going long and orange across the hills outside. At the creek she could see through the glass, still moving, always moving. That thin silver line of water that Cormac Desh had been trying to put his name on for months. He put the land in my name, she said. That's what the letter says. He never told me. No. She looked at him. Why would he register it without telling me? Holt's jaw moved. A small thing, like he was choosing his next few words carefully. Because knowing made you a target, he said. If Desh found out you knew, he already made me a target. The edge in her voice surprised even her. I've been a target since the day my father got sick. Since before that, probably. Since the day Desh decided he wanted this land. She put both hands flat on the table. My father protected me from knowing something that already had its aim on me, quiet. Holt didn't argue with that. Didn't tell her Cal had been right or wrong. He just sat with what she'd said and let it be what it was. Which, she realized, was exactly what her father used to do. She hated that, she noticed that. He says you know where Desh came from, she said. What does that mean? The fire in the stove had caught. Warm light starting to move across the table. Outside, the wind was picking up, moving through the cottonwood trees near the creek with that low sound she'd always liked. The sound that had meant home since she was a child. Holt was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he reached into his coat again. Not another letter. Something else. Small. Metal. A watch fob with an initial on it. He set it on the table. Didn't say anything. She looked at it. A letter D. Abilene wasn't the only time I met Cormac Desh, he said. His voice had changed. Not dramatically. Just gone down a register. Gone flatter. The way voices go when they reach something they've been carrying too long in a dark place. 3 years ago, he said, I was in a town called Milford, edge of Wyoming territory. Small place. Cattle town. I had a house there. A pause. My boy was 8 years old. Ruby went still. Desh wanted the land the Milford operation sat on. Same thing, different state. He had men come in the same way. Pressure. Papers. Threats. Most people sold. Another pause. Longer. I didn't. She could already see where this was going. She didn't stop him. There was a fire, he said. Flat. Final. The words shaped by 3 years of being said, inside his own head until they'd worn down to their smallest possible size. Night of April 14th, 1875. My house. I was across town. Desh had made sure of that first. When I got back, he stopped. The watch fob sat on the table between them. Letter D. His name was Walt, Holt said. 8 years old. Named after your father. Cal was the best man I knew when that boy was born, and I named him after the best man I knew, the cottonwoods outside, the creek. The fire in the stove. Ruby couldn't speak. When I got Cal's letter, Holt said, I was already in Wyoming. Already following a 3-year-old trail that kept going cold, and then warm again, and then cold. Following Desh, he looked at the letter on the table. When I saw his name in Cal's handwriting, it was the first solid thing I'd had in 18 months. You came for him, she said quietly. Not just for my father, I came for both. He looked at her. Your father saved my life once, in Abilene. Nothing dramatic. Just the right moment and the right decision. And I walked away from something I shouldn't have. I owed him. I've been owing him for 9 years. His eyes dropped to the letter. Turns out, he never wanted to collect. He just wanted his daughter looked after. Ruby looked at the window again. The orange light. The hills. Desh killed my father, she said. Not a question. Holt looked at her. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. But his silence said everything her father's letter hadn't. She already knew, on some level. That was the thing. She'd known since April. Since the morning she found her father at the kitchen table with his head bowed and his coffee cup still full beside him. Since Deputy Ira Spool had come out and looked at the scene for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, she had counted, absurdly. She had counted, and written natural causes in his little book, and closed it and tipped his hat and left. Since she'd stood on the porch watching the deputy ride back toward Deadwood, and known with a certainty she couldn't prove and couldn't shake, that something was wrong with all of it. Her father had been healthy, not young healthy. Old man on a working ranch, healthy. The kind of health that comes from hard labor and clean air and a body that's made peace with what it has to do every day. He had aches. He had a bad shoulder from an old fall. He did not have a weak heart. He did not simply put his head down at the kitchen table and stop. But she was 20 years old, and she was a woman, and she was not what anyone in Deadwood would call a credible witness to anything. And so she'd stood on that porch and watched Spool ride away and done the only thing she could think to do. She kept the ranch running. She fed the cattle and fixed what she could fix and let the fence lean and let the barn stay charred and put one foot in front of the other every morning. Her father had built this place out of nothing, and she was not going to let it fall apart because someone wanted her to. That was 3 months ago, and she had been alone for all 3 of them, until now. She brought the whiskey from the shelf above the stove without asking if he wanted any. Set 2 cups down, poured. He didn't say thank you. He picked it up and held it the way men hold something that costs them, and she thought he was going to drink it. But he just held it. The letter says he found something last winter, she said, and registered it. What did he find? I don't know yet. But you have a guess. Maybe. She put down her cup. Don't manage me. He looked at her. Don't talk to me the way people talk to me when they think I can't handle something. I've been handling everything alone for 3 months. My father's dead. My land is being taken. I've been shoved down on the street twice now. She stopped. Reset. I can handle the truth, Mr. Calloway. I'd rather have it than a comfortable version of it. A long moment. He put his cup down. Your father's letter says Desh came here because of what's under the land. Not the land itself. The creek runs north through your property, and it runs deep. There are formations in the Black Hills this far east that carry. He paused. He might have found a deposit. Something worth more than cattle rights. Ruby looked at the table. Her father's letter. The watch fob, with the letter D. Then, this isn't about my ranch, she said slowly. No, Desh doesn't want the land. He wants what's underneath it. She absorbed this. The box. She stood up fast. My father had a box. I haven't looked at it since he died. I put it on the shelf, and she was already moving toward the back room. The small room her father had used as an office, if you could call a shelf and a chair and a writing board nailed to the wall an office. She stopped in the doorway there. On the middle shelf, a wooden box, small, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth. Her father's practical, unbeautiful handwriting on a piece of paper tucked under the cloth, for Ruby. Open when you are ready. She hadn't been ready. She stood in the doorway for a moment, with her hand on the frame. Then she went in and took the box down from the shelf. Holt sat at the table and didn't crowd her. She came back with the box and set it down between them. The wood was old, nothing fancy. A simple box with a latch. A piece of paper tucked under the oilcloth wrapping. She unfolded the paper, her father's handwriting. Dated February 14, 1878. Ruby. By the time you read this, I may not have been able to tell you myself, so I'm writing it down the way I always should have. Last November, I found something in the north section, near the first bend in the creek where the water slows and the banks go soft. I wasn't looking. I was fixing the fence post and my shovel hit something that didn't sound like rock. I took a chemical to a man I trust in Cheyenne. He confirmed it in January. Silver-bearing ore. Significant deposit. The formation runs east under the creek bed. I filed a mining claim with the Federal Land Office in February, under the Mining Act of 1872. It is registered and legal. The claim is in your name, Ruby. You are the claimant of record. The paperwork is in this box. The original receipt from the Cheyenne Bank showing the property debts are paid in full is also here. If anyone tells you this ranch owes money, they are lying. Tell the right people. Find someone you can trust. I love you. My dad. Ruby read the letter once. Twice. She set it down and opened the box inside. Papers. Receipts. Cattle records in her father's cramped writing. And on top of everything else, folded in a separate piece of oilcloth to protect it, a federal mining claim form, filled out in her father's handwriting, filed with the United States Land Office, stamped, dated February 19, 1878, claimant, Ruby Eleanor Graves, and, underneath it, a second document, a bank receipt from the Citizens Bank of Cheyenne, Wyoming, dated October 1877, payment in full. Property at Graves Creek, Deadwood District, signed by the bank manager, stamped the debt Cormac Desch said her father owed, paid, in full. 7 months ago, Ruby sat with the papers in her hands for a long time. Holt was looking at her, not the documents. He knew, she said. Her voice came out strange, not crying, not angry, something between the two that didn't have a name. He knew Desch was lying. He had the proof right here and she stopped, put the papers down carefully. He died with the proof in a box on his shelf. He was trying to protect you by not letting on that he knew. It didn't protect him, the fire in the stove. The cottonwoods outside. Holt put his hand on the table. Not on her hand, just on the table. Close enough to be there. Not close enough to push anything. No, he said. It didn't. Ruby looked at the mining claim. Her name on it in father's handwriting. Ruby Eleanor Graves. He'd known her middle name came out wrong. He'd always laughed about it. Eleanor. After her mother, who'd been nothing like an Eleanor, but it was the name they'd had, and they'd kept it. He'd put it on an official federal document. He'd done it in February, when Desch was already circling. When the pressure was already starting, he'd gone to Cheyenne, filed the paperwork, come home, and never said a word, because he was protecting her. Same as always. Same way that had gotten him killed. She folded the mining claim carefully, put it back in the box, put the receipt in after it, closed the latch. We need to take these to someone, she said. Yes, someone who isn't bought. That's the harder part. She looked at him. Is there anyone in this town who isn't afraid of Desch? Holt was quiet for a moment. There might be, he said. Let me think on it tonight. She nodded, stood up, took her cup to the basin. There's a room at the back, she said. My father's. I haven't. A pause. There's a cot in the storeroom if you'd rather. Storeroom's fine. She nodded again. She was at the door to the hallway when he said, Ruby. She stopped. Your father was right about one thing. His voice came from behind her, quiet, directed at the table or the fire or maybe just at the air between them. You don't need anyone to fight for you. You just needed someone to stand next to you long enough. She didn't turn around, stood there a moment with her hand on the doorframe. Good night, Mr. Calloway, she said. Good night. She lay on her bed in the dark and listened to the creek. Couldn't sleep. Hadn't slept right since April. Probably wouldn't sleep right for a while yet. But she lay there, and she listened to the water moving outside. The same water her father had found something in. The same water Cormac Desch was willing to kill a man over. And she thought about the box on the table downstairs. Her name in her father's handwriting on a federal document. Ruby Eleanor Graves, claimant of record. He'd given her the land, the real land, not just the ranch and the cattle and the fence that needed fixing, the whole thing. Under the ground and in the water and in the official records of the United States federal government, he'd done it quietly, without telling her. In his way, she stared at the ceiling. Thought about Boone Pritchard's hand on her arm, the flower on the boards, 4 words from a man she'd never met who'd ridden 6 days to stand next to her. Nobody touches her again. She thought about Cormac Desh, a name she'd known for months as a shape, a pressure, a presence at the edge of every decision she'd made since April. Now she knew his shape better, knew he'd done this before, knew there was a burned house in Milford, Wyoming, and an 8-year-old boy named Walt, and a man sleeping on a cot in her storeroom, who had been carrying that for 3 years. She thought about her father's last letter, how he'd known, how he'd been afraid, how he'd still had the good sense to leave her exactly what she needed. Outside, the cottonwoods moved, the creek kept running. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow they'd figure out who in Deadwood could still be trusted. Tomorrow they'd decide what to do with the papers in that box and how to do it before Cormac Desh decided to stop being patient. Tomorrow. She was asleep before she finished the thought. Down in the storeroom, Holt Calloway lay on the cot in the dark and did not sleep. He looked at the ceiling. He'd been in enough places like this, on enough cots, in enough storerooms, enough nights before enough hard days. He knew the arithmetic of it, what was coming, what it was likely to cost. He'd run that calculation so many times over the past 3 years it had started to feel like breathing, automatic. Background. But tonight something was different about the arithmetic. It wasn't just his anymore. He thought about Cal's letter, the way the man had written it. Careful. Trying to be clear without being frightening. Putting the important things first. Not asking for anything he couldn't ask for. Just come if you can. Make sure my daughter knows what she has. She knows now. And she was going to fight for it. He'd seen that on the main street of Deadwood before she'd even gotten back to her feet. The way she'd looked at Boone Pritchard, not with fear, with something much more inconvenient than fear refusal. He reached into his coat, where it hung on the peg pad of the cot, found the watch fob without looking, the letter D. He held it in the dark. 3 years. He'd spent 3 years following a ghost and finding nothing that would stick. Desh was careful. Always had been. Careful and patient, and never in the same room when the bad thing happened. Just the architect. Just the man who decided and sent others to do. No blood on his hands. No proof. But here, in this storeroom, in a ranch owned by a 20-year-old woman, with her dead father's name stitched on a canvas sack, there was a box on the table with a federal mining claim and a paid bank receipt and evidence of a lie that Cormac Desh had been building for months. Not enough. Not yet. But something, the first something in 3 years. He put the watch fob back in his coat. Outside, the creek ran north through the dark. Under the ground beneath it, somewhere, silver-bearing ore that Calhoun Graves had found with a shovel, and a fence post and a broken piece of bad luck that had turned out to be something entirely different, her name on a federal document. In Cal's handwriting, filed and stamped and real, Holt closed his eyes. Thought about a kitchen table in Milford, a boy with his mother's eyes, the smell of smoke on the night air when he'd come running back across town. He thought about Cal's letter. Come if you can, old friend. I'm sorry it's been 9 years. I'm sorry it was 3 months too late, Holt said to the ceiling. Quiet enough that it was barely a sound at all. Just a shape in the dark. He put his arm over his eyes. Tomorrow then, first light. He'd find out who in Deadwood still had a conscience worth something, and he'd figure out how much time they had before Cormac Desh decided that patience was no longer serving him. The creek ran on outside. The cottonwoods moved in the dark. Deadwood slept the way guilty places sleep. Badly, with one eye open, and in a storeroom on the edge of it all, a man with an old debt and a new reason finally let himself rest. The morning came in sideways. That thin gray light that isn't quite dawn and isn't quite dark anymore. The kind that makes everything look like it's holding its breath. Ruby was already up. She'd been up since 4. Couldn't say exactly when she stopped pretending to sleep and started just lying there, with her eyes open listening to the ranch. The sounds it made when it thought nobody was paying attention. The creak of the north wall. The cattle shifting near the creek. A nighthawk somewhere out past the barn calling once, and then going quiet. She had coffee on the stove by the time she heard Holt moving in the storeroom, not loud. Just the soft scrape of boots on the floor, measured, like a man who'd spent enough nights in other people's spaces to know how to move through them without disturbing anything. He came through the door and stopped, looked at the coffee, at her, at the box on the table where she'd left it the night before. "You sleep?" he asked. Some, which was almost true. He poured his own coffee, sat down, didn't ask more questions about it. Just wrapped his hands around the cup and looked out the window at the gray light coming up over the hills. She liked that about him. The not asking more. She wasn't ready to examine why she liked it. Too early for that kind of examination. "I've been thinking," she said. "All right, Prentice Mull." He looked at her. "He runs the Deadwood Courier." She sat down across from him. "My father used to say Mull was the only man in town who'd print something true, even if it cost him. He'd said that 3 years ago. I don't know if it's still true." A pause. "But if it is, he's the one who can make this public before Desh can bury it." Holt nodded slowly, thinking it through. "Public is harder to make disappear than private." "That's what I thought." He looked at her over the rim of the cup. "You thought through all of that between midnight and now?" "I told you I slept some." The corner of his mouth moved. Almost. Not quite a smile. More like the memory of one. She stood up and started on breakfast. Not because she was hungry. Because her hands needed something to do while her brain kept running. Because her brain had been running since she found that box. Since she'd read her father's handwriting on that federal document. Since she'd lain in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a mining claim, and a paid receipt and a man named Desh, who had apparently been doing this for long enough and far enough that his trail ran all the way to Wyoming, and an 8-year-old boy named Walt. She cracked eggs into the pan without asking if he wanted eggs. He didn't object, which answered the question. They rode out at 7. The road into Deadwood was quiet at that hour. A supply wagon heading north. 2 miners on foot coming down from the hills with the tired look of men who'd been at it since before light. A dog that followed them for half a mile and then decided it had better things to do. Holt rode slightly behind her on the right, not in front, not leading, just. There, she noticed, chose not to comment. The Deadwood Courier occupied a narrow building, squeezed between a dry goods store and what used to be a dentist's office, before the dentist decided Deadwood wasn't worth his nerves and left for Cheyenne. The sign above the door was Fader. The deed paint for 2 years. Now it just said Deadwood Courier, which Ruby had always thought was accidentally appropriate. She went in first. The inside smelled like ink, old ink. The kind that gets into the walls, the kind that becomes the building. There were papers everywhere, stacked, filed in ways that suggested a system she couldn't decode, a hand press in the back room. Galleys of type in wooden frames along the wall, and behind a desk that was more paper than wood, Prentice Mull. He was older than she remembered. Late 60s, maybe. White hair that stood up on one side like he'd been running his hand through it for 40 years, and it had given up fighting back. Ink on his fingers. Always ink on his fingers. Spectacles pushed up on his forehead, where they did absolutely no work at all. He looked up when she came in, then he looked past her at Holt, then back at her, Miss Graves. A pause. "You look like someone who didn't sleep. Good morning to you too, Mr. Mull. And you've brought Holt Calloway." Holt came through the door and closed it behind him. "I'm a friend of her father's." Mull studied him for a moment. A newspaper man's study, the kind that catalogs and files and doesn't show its work. "Calloway," he repeated. "You ride in recently?" "Yesterday, I see." He took his spectacles down from his forehead and put them on, then looked at Ruby. "You're here because something happened on the main street yesterday. You heard. I print news, Miss Graves. I hear everything." He leaned back in his chair, which creaked in a way that suggested it had been creaking for 20 years, and everyone had made peace with it. What I heard was that Boone Pritchard tried to strong-arm you in public. Again. And that your friend here. A nod toward Holt suggested he reconsider. That's mostly accurate, Holt said. Mostly. Moll looked at him over the spectacles. What's the part I'm missing? Ruby reached into her coat and put the box on the desk. Moll looked at her. She opened it, took out the mining claim, took out the bank receipt, laid them side by side on the only clear inch of desk space available. Moll leaned forward, read the mining claim first. Slowly, his lips moved slightly. The habit of someone who'd read so many words over so many decades that reading had become a physical process. Then the receipt. Then he sat back, took his spectacles off, rubbed the bridge of his nose, put them back on. Your father filed this in February, he said. Under my name, as claimant silver-bearing ore. He looked at the window. At the street outside where Deadwood was slowly coming to life in the morning. Lord Almighty. The receipt shows the property debt paid in full. October last year, Ruby kept her voice steady. Before Desh started claiming my father owed money. He lied, Moll said. He lied. Moll was quiet for a moment, a long moment. The kind that has weight to it. Ruby watched his face. The thing that moved across it, something complicated. Something that looked less like surprise, and more like a man having a feeling he'd been postponing for a very long time. Mr. Moll, Holt said quietly. Cal Graves said you were the one man in this town who'd print something true even if it cost him. Moll looked at him. Cal Graves, he said, was a generous man. Was he wrong? Another pause? No. Moll turned back to the documents. He wasn't wrong, then quieter. I just hadn't been asked to prove it for a while. He picked up the bank receipt, held it up to the light from the window, reading it again. Every word. I have these two documents, he said. I have the story of what happened on the main street yesterday, which half the town witnessed and the other half heard about. He set the receipt down. What I don't have is someone who will speak to the original debt claim. Someone who was present when Desh filed it. Someone inside his operation who knows how the paperwork was altered. Ruby opened her mouth, closed it, because she'd been about to say something that hadn't occurred to her until right now. A name, a face. Dex Hooper, the young one. From yesterday. The one who hadn't laughed. The one who'd looked slightly sick, and then looked at the ground and followed Boone Pritchard away, because he didn't know what else to do. She'd grown up in Deadwood. She knew Dex Hooper. She knew his mother. She knew he was 22 and he'd gone to work for Desh 8 months ago because his family needed the money, and jobs in Deadwood went through Desh, whether you liked it or not. She knew that look on his face yesterday. She'd seen it before. On her own face. In the mirror. The look of someone who knows something is wrong and doesn't yet know what to do with that knowledge. I might know someone, she said. Both men looked at her. Let me try something, she said. Don't print anything yet. Give me until this afternoon. Moll looked at Holt. Holt looked at Ruby. What are you thinking? He said. I'm thinking, she said carefully, that not everyone who works for a bad man is a bad man. Here was the problem with that plan. She had to find Dex Hooper without Boone Pritchard. Seeing her find Dex Hooper, which meant moving through Deadwood quietly. Which meant looking like someone doing ordinary things. Which meant, you can't come with me, she told Holt when they got back to the horses. He looked at her. You walk into any part of town I'm in, she said, and Boone will be there within 10 minutes. You made an impression yesterday. Not a subtle one. I wasn't trying to be subtle, I know. It worked, and now your face is known and every pair of eyes Desh has in this town is watching for it. She put her foot in the stirrup. I've been invisible in Deadwood my whole life. Today that's useful, he didn't argue, which surprised her, which probably shouldn't have surprised her. He didn't seem like a man who argued when the other person was right. I'll find the man you mentioned, he said. The deputy, Ira Spool. Where do I find him when he doesn't want to be found? She thought for a moment. He drinks coffee at Hennessy's boarding house every morning until 9. After that, he's either at the jail or he's nowhere. Holt checked the sun. I've got 20 minutes. He turned his horse and rode. She watched him go. Then she turned the opposite direction and went looking for a 22-year-old boy. With a guilty conscience, she found Dex Hooper at the livery stable, not hiding, just working. Mucking out stalls the way men did when they needed their hands busy and their mind somewhere else. He had his back to the door when she came in. Didn't hear her at first over the sounds of the horses and the scrape of the shovel. She stood just inside the door. He spun around. Tom saw her. The look on his face went through about 6 things in 2 seconds. Surprise, recognition, guilt, fear. Something else underneath all of it that she needed to be the thing that won. Miss Graves. His voice came out wrong, too high. He cleared his throat. I wasn't. I'm not here to cause trouble, she said. Then why? I need to talk to you. He looked at the door behind her, checking. She stepped further in to give him a clear view that nobody was with her. Nobody sent me, she said. Nobody knows I'm here. If Boone sees Boone isn't here, he will be. He's everywheres. Dex put the shovel down, ran his hand through his hair. Young. He was so young. She'd forgotten how young 22 looked when it was scared. I can't talk to you, Miss Graves. I work for Mr. Desch, and if he finds out, he's going to lose everything. Dex stopped. The papers, she said. The debt claim he used to start taking my father's land. The debt was paid. Last October. My father kept the receipt. I have it. A pause. And I have a federal mining claim filed under my name in February. Legal. Registered. Which means Desch has been trying to steal land he has no right to, and lying about the debt to do it. Silence. The horses shifted. One of them blew out a slow breath. Dex stared at her. If that comes out, she said, and it's going to come out, then everyone who knew and said nothing is standing right next to him when it does. His jaw worked. I didn't know about any mining claim, he said. Low. Almost a whisper. I believe you. I thought it was just land. The ranch. I thought it was just. I know. I didn't know your father was. He stopped. Couldn't finish that one. I know that too. She waited. Let the silence do its work. Let him stand there in the livery stable, with the smell of hay and horses around him, and his shovel on the ground and the weight of what he'd been carrying. For however long he'd been carrying. Finally. What do you need? The original debt papers, she said. Where did they come from? Who signed them? How were they filed? Dex closed his eyes. Open them. Boone brought them to the land office, he said. 6 months ago. I was with him. I carried the case. I didn't read them. A pause. But I heard Boone tell the clerk that Judge Harker had authenticated them. Judge Harker. Of course. Judge Harker is Boone's uncle, Dex said like she might not know. She knew. They keep it quiet, but everyone on the inside knows. Can you swear to that? In writing? To a newspaper man. He stared at her for a long time. She didn't push. Didn't threaten. Didn't try to talk him into anything. Just waited. Because this was his decision to make, and making it for him would only mean he unmade it the second she left the room. Boone, he said slowly. He's going to. By the time Boone knows, it'll be in print. Another long moment. Then Dex Hooper. 22 years old, with his shovel on the ground and his conscience apparently still functioning, said, When? Now, she said. If you're willing. He picked up his jacket from the hook by the stall. My mother's going to kill me, he said. She'll forgive you. You don't know my mother, despite everything. Despite all of it. Ruby almost smiled. Holt was already at Mull's office when they got there. He was standing against the wall in that way he had, taking up exactly as much space as he needed, and not 1 inch more. Looking at Mull, who was sitting behind his desk with an expression that suggested something significant had happened in the last 45 minutes. Deputy Ira Spool was sitting in the one chair that wasn't covered in paper. He looked like a man who'd made a decision he was already second-guessing. Which, fair enough, Ira Spool was 50, thin in the way men get thin when they've worried themselves down to their frame over many years. He had the badge of the Deadwood deputy marshal on his shirt, but it sat there like something he'd borrowed and never quite felt he owned. He looked up when Ruby came in with Dex Hooper. Spool's eyes went to Dex. Dex's eyes went to Spool. Some kind of recognition passed between them. Not warm, not hostile. Just the recognition of two men who both knew they'd been making the wrong choices for too long, and were now in the same room discovering they weren't alone in that. "Miss Graves," Spool said. "Deputy. I was just telling Mr. Calloway something you should probably hear." She came and stood near Holt, not leaning on him, just near. "There's going to be an auction," Spool said. "Desch filed for it yesterday afternoon. While you were." He paused. "After what happened on the street, he moved fast. Had Judge Harker signed the seizure order last night." His voice went flat on those words, like he was reading them off a wall instead of saying them. "Auction is day after tomorrow, 9 in the morning. Your property goes on the block." The room went quiet. Day after tomorrow, not next week. Not in some comfortable future tense. Day after tomorrow, 9 in the morning. The land her father had built from nothing and filed a federal mining claim to protect and filled with cattle and fences and a kitchen table too big for two people. "He moved," Holt said. "Low. Because he knows you found something." "He doesn't know what we found," Ruby said. "He knows enough." Mull had been listening without speaking. He did that. Listened the way journalists listen. Still water that moves underneath. 2 days, he said now. 2 days, Ruby confirmed. He looked at Dex Hooper, who had been standing just inside the door, looking like a man at the edge of a very high place, deciding whether to step off. "Young man," Mull said. "I hear you have something to tell me about the original debt paperwork." Dex swallowed. "Yes, sir." "Then sit down." Mull picked up a pencil. "And speak slowly. I'm old, and I write everything down twice." They stayed at Mull's for 2 hours. Dex talked. Mull wrote. Ruby answered questions when Mull had them. Holt stood by the wall and watched the street through the window and said nothing for most of it. Spool sat in his chair and added what he knew, which was more than Ruby had expected, because it turned out Ira Spool had been watching. "For longer than anyone knew, I sent a letter to the U.S. Marshal Office in Cheyenne," he said, during a pause while Mull refilled his ink. Everyone looked at him. 3 days ago," Spool said. He was looking at his hands. "After Desch told Boone to, he stopped, adjusted. After I heard something I couldn't put in my own file." Ruby looked at him. 3 days ago, before Holt had even ridden into Deadwood. Which meant Spool had been waiting for something to break open. Had placed his bet before anyone asked him to. "Didn't know if it would do any good," Spool continued. "Marshals are slow." A pause. "But I sent it." "What did you hear?" Holt said. Spool looked up at him. Then at Ruby. "After the auction," he said carefully. "Desch told Boone there were no loose ends. The room understood what that meant." Ruby understood what that meant. She kept her face very still. No loose ends. She's 20 years old, and the daughter of a man who'd been killed for finding silver ore on his own land. And she was a loose end. She had known that on some level. She had known it since April. Since watching Spool write natural causal book. She had known it the way you know weather is coming. Not from looking at the sky, but from the feeling in your bones before you can say why. Still, hearing it said out loud in a newspaper office by a deputy who looked like he'd been losing sleep over it for 3 days different. Holt looked at her. Just looked. Didn't say anything. Didn't rush to reassure her or tell her it would be fine, or any of the other things people said when they wanted to make themselves feel better about someone else's danger. He just looked at her. And she looked back, and something passed between them that wasn't words. Something that had to do with two people who had both already lost the thing that mattered most and were still here, still standing in a room making decisions. Still. "All right," she said. Steady. Her voice was steady. "We have 2 days," she looked at Mull. "Can you print before the auction?" "I can print by tomorrow morning," Mull said, "if I have everything I need by tonight." "What do you still need?" "Copies of your documents. Statement from Deputy Spool here on the record. Statement from young Mr. Hooper." He looked at Dex. "And someone to help me get the papers distributed before Boone Pritchard can collect them from the doorsteps. I'll handle distribution." Spool said. Everyone looked at him again. He had the look of a man who had just surprised himself. My deputies owe me favors, he said. The ones that aren't Desh's. A pause. There are two of them. It wasn't an army, but it was something. They left Mull's office at midday. Holt went ahead to check the street. Old habit. He didn't explain it, and she didn't ask for an explanation. She just let him look first and followed when he came back. Clear, he said. They walked to where the horses were tied. She had flour to buy. The reason she'd come to town yesterday in the first place. The errand that had started all of this. 24 hours ago, she'd been heading to Eddington's for flour and salt pork. Now she had a plan, and a newspaperman, and a guilty 22-year-old, and a deputy marshal who'd been carrying a secret for 3 days, and a federal mining claim in a box on her kitchen table. And a man walking beside her who didn't fill silence with noise. She bought the flour. He carried it without being asked. She didn't say anything about that either. They were almost to the horses when she heard it. Footsteps. The wrong kind. That cadence she'd learned to recognize. Too deliberate. Not going anywhere. Going towards something, she stopped. Holt had already stopped. Boone Pritchard came around the corner of the feed store. Same two men with him as yesterday. Same grin. But something had changed in the texture of it. Less casual, more considered. The grin of a man who'd been given new instructions and was working through the implications. Miss Graves, he looked at Holt. Calloway, he knew the name. Which meant Desh had been asking around since yesterday. Mr. Desh would like to speak with you, Boone said, looking at Ruby. Friendly conversation. About the auction. He thought you might have questions. Tell Mr. Desh, Ruby said, that I'll be at the auction. He'd rather speak before. I'm sure he would. Boone's smile went tight at the edges. This doesn't have to be difficult, Miss Graves, funny. It keeps being difficult anyway. She walked to her horse. Untied it, mounted, her hands were absolutely shaking. Under her gloves, where nobody could see them. Because she was terrified. She'd been terrified for months. She was terrified right now, standing 6 feet from Boone Pritchard, who reported to a man who'd told him there were no loose ends after the auction. But she was getting on her horse, and she was not crying, and she was not signing any papers. And she was not going to have a friendly conversation with Cormac Desh Holt. Mounted, moved his horse up alongside hers. Looked at Boone. She gave you an answer, he said. Sebel. Final. The same quality that 4 words it had yesterday morning. The kind of statement that isn't a threat. Just a door being closed. Boone looked at him for a long moment, then at the sack of flour across Ruby's saddle. Then something came across his face that hadn't been there yesterday. Something calculating. Like a man working math, Mr. Desh, he said slowly. Says he remembers Milford. The world went quiet. Not the town kept going. Somebody's cartwheel squeaking, voices from the saloon, the bad piano, all of that kept going. But between Boone's words and whatever came next, there was a pocket of absolute silence that had nothing to do with sound. Ruby looked at Holt, his face. She had been watching his face for 2 days now, learning its rhythms, the small movements that meant something, the stillness that meant more. She'd learned that Holt Calloway wore his feelings the way a man wore an old coat over a wound, covering it, not hiding it, just covering. She watched his face now. Something moved in it deep, old, the way something moves at the bottom of water that looks still from above, not fear, something older than fear. He looked at Boone Pritchard for 3 seconds. Then, tell Desh I remember it too, and he rode. She followed. She didn't look back at Boone. She could feel his eyes on her back, all the way to the North Road. They rode in silence for longer than usual. The hills, the grass, the scrub, the same road, same light. Everything the same as this morning except nothing the same at all. Milford, she said finally. Yes, he knows who you are. He knew who I was the moment I stepped into that street yesterday. He just needed time to verify it, and now he has. Yes, she looked at the road ahead. What does that mean? For the plan. Holt rode for a moment without answering. It means we have less time than we thought, he said. Desh isn't patient when he's worried. And a man who's been building this carefully for this long doesn't worry often. But he's worried now. He should be. She looked at him sideways because of the documents, and because I'm here. And because you haven't signed anything. A pause. He's used to people breaking. He pushes and they break. Your father didn't break. That surprised him. Now you're not breaking. That worries him. What worries him about you? A long pause. That I know what he did, Holt said. And I've been looking for 3 years. And I don't stop, she thought about that. He has options, she said. Desh does. He can wait for the auction. Or he can decide not to wait. Yes. Which one does he choose? I don't know yet. Not the answer she wanted, she respected him for giving it anyway. That evening they spread the papers out on her father's table again. Mining claim. Receipt. The notes Mull had given her of what Dex had said. Spoole's written statement, which he'd pushed through the door of the courier before 5 o'clock, signed, dated, specific. Mull had what he needed. He was printing tonight. She stood at the table and looked at everything laid out. The evidence of her father's care, his planning. The way he'd thought 3-4 moves ahead and made sure his daughter had what she needed, even when he couldn't be there to give it to her himself. Holt was outside. She could hear him checking the perimeter of the ranch the way he checked it every evening. She'd started noticing when she stopped hearing the quiet footsteps, which was how she knew he'd come back in. She put water on for coffee, stood at the window and looked at the creek, the silver-bearing ore her father had found. Under the water. Sitting there for however long it had been sitting there, decades, centuries maybe. Waiting for a man fixing a fence post to hit it with a shovel. Her father had stood in this exact spot, she thought. Standing at this window looking at that creek, knowing what was under it, knowing what it meant. Knowing what men like Desh would do when they found out. He'd been afraid. He must have been afraid. And still he'd gone to Cheyenne, filed the paperwork, put her name on it, come home and put the box on the shelf, and written for Ruby on a piece of paper, and said, "Open when you are ready." She heard Holt come in. She poured the coffee. They sat. The table between them, with all the papers, and the box that had started all of this. Neither of them spoke for a while. Outside, the cottonwoods moved. The creek. A nighthawk somewhere out past the barn calling its one note into the dark. She was starting to think it lived somewhere out there permanently, that it called every night at this hour, and she just hadn't been listening carefully enough before. "Tell me about Walt," she said. She hadn't planned to say it, it just came out. Quiet, direct. The way things came out at 9 in the evening, after a day like this one. Holt looked at his cup. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell." Another pause. Longer than most. The kind where you could see a man working through what he actually had words for versus what was still too close to the bone to survive. Being said out loud, he had his mother's eyes, Holt said. Dark. Quick. The kind of eyes that find things. He'd spot a hawk in a tree at 300 yards before I'd even looked up. A small pause. His mother died when he was 4. Fever. We moved around after that. Him and me, and whatever work I could find. He liked it. Moving. He called it our adventures. Something moved in Holt's voice. Something that had been kept below the surface for a long time, and almost came up before he got it back under. Every new town was an adventure. He had names for the horses. He had names for everything. A pause. Walt was a quiet kid, but his head was never quiet. Always thinking. Always watching. Reminded me of he stopped. Of who? Holt looked up. Your father, he said. She didn't have anything to say to that, so she just let it sit there. On the table between them. With the papers and the coffee in the box. Milford seemed like a place we could stop. Holt said. Good work. Safe enough. Walt liked the school. The teacher there was kind to him. Treated him the same as the other kids. A pause. That mattered. He hadn't always been treated the same, because he'd been a child without a mother. A child who moved around. A child who didn't always fit the expected shape of things. Ruby understood that more than she could say. When the trouble with Desh started, Holt said, "I should have left, taken Walt, and gone. But I'd been moving for 4 years and I was tired. I thought I could handle it. I thought I was reading it right." His jaw moved. I wasn't. Desh moved faster than I expected, made sure I was across town, and then he stopped, put his hands flat on the table. "I don't talk about it much," he said. "The specifics. You don't have to." "No, but..." He looked at the window, the dark outside. "I want you to know that I understand what it is to lose someone to that man. Not just to know it happened to you. To carry it. To wake up with it. To ride for 3 years because standing still feels like giving him what he wants." She looked at him. This man, 45 years old. Worn down to something essential and hard and still somehow not broken. Who'd ridden 6 days because a dead friend had asked him to. Who'd stood on a dusty street and said 4 words and meant every one of them. Who had named his son after her father. "He would have liked you," she said. Holt looked at her. "Your father," she said. "He would have." She stopped, reset. He always said the best people were the ones who kept showing up. Even when it cost them, he was one of those people. Yes, a beat. "So are you." He looked at her for a moment. Then back at his cup. Nothing more was said. It was enough. She was almost asleep when she heard the dogs, not her dogs. She didn't have dogs anymore. The last one had died in January. Old age. Something else she'd handled alone. The dogs she heard were wild. Somewhere out north of the barn. Barking at something that didn't belong. She was out of bed before she'd finished thinking about it. Grabbed her father's coat from the hook, his rifle from the corner, crept to the window, the barn. There was light. Not lantern light, not the soft yellow of a lantern orange. Moving. Licking up the side of the old storage shed, attached to the barn's east wall. Fire. No, 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 no. She was out the door and down the porch steps and running across the yard before she'd registered her bare feet on the ground. The gravel, the cold. Holt came out of the storeroom door 2 seconds behind her, rifle in hand. Awake, completely awake, like he hadn't been sleeping at all. "East side," she called. He saw it, ran past her toward the well. She was already at the trough. Bucket, rope, the water cold enough to shock her hands. She didn't feel it, pulled anyway. Moving fast. Moving the way she'd moved in April, when the fire had started in the storage section the first time. Except April had been an accident. Everyone said it was an accident. A lantern knocked over. This was not an accident, because the east wall of the shed was burning at the base. Not the top, not where sparks landed the base, where someone had laid something flammable along the boards and lit it at the bottom. Deliberate, practiced. The same way a fire got started that was meant to spread fast and mean it. Coal oil. She could smell it over the smoke. She threw the first bucket. Steam and smoke exploded outward. She turned her face away, came back. Holt was already at the pump, working it. The old iron pump in the corner of the yard that she could never get more than half a bucket of pressure from in summer. He was getting pressure from it. She didn't ask how, just took the bucket he handed her and ran back. 3rd bucket. 4th, the fire on the east wall, going dark at the bottom, still burning higher. But if they could get the base, a sound behind her, movement. From the trees behind the barn, she spun. A figure, coming fast, torch in hand. She had her father's rifle up. Before she'd consciously made the decision to raise it, the figure stopped. Close enough now that the torchlight caught his face. Dex Hooper stared at her over the barrel of her rifle, with an expression of complete and total horror. "Don't shoot." She's lowered Uncle. Dexel's torch hand was shaking. "I'm not. I came to warn you. Boone sent 2 men out. Where are they now?" Holt's voice. From behind her, steady east tree line. "They set the fire and went back for," Dex pointed. "There." They went for the house. She turned. 2 shapes, coming across the yard from the north. Fast. One of them had something. Holt moved, not toward her, between her and them. Fast for a man with a bad left knee. Faster than he'd moved yesterday. Like something had switched in him. Like the calculation she'd heard him describe, The one he'd been running for 3 years had just resolved to a single clear answer. The first man came in hard. Holt stepped aside, let him come, grabbed the arm with the torch and twisted. Hard. The sound was bad. The man went down. The torch hit the dirt and went out. Second man was bigger, swinging something, a timber length. Holt took the hit on his left shoulder instead of his head because he'd already angled away. Still bad. He stumbled, one knee down, Ruby shot. Not at the man. Above him. Into the dark above his left ear he froze. The whole yard froze. The sound of the shot rolling away into the hills. The crackling of the fire, still going on the east wall. Smaller now. The buckets had worked. Still alive. But smaller. The man with the timber stood very still. "Put it down," she said. He put it down. Her voice was not shaking. Her hands under the rifle were shaking. But her voice was not. Holt got back up. Shoulder clearly wrong. The way he moved protecting it told her that. Butt up. Back on his feet. His revolver in his good hand. The man in the yard looked between them. "Walk," Holt said, pointed north. Away from the ranch, the man walked. Fast. Then faster. Then running. Into the dark. The man on the ground with the bad arm made a sound. Holt looked at him. "Can you walk?" The man nodded. "Then go," he went. She looked at Dex. A man who hadn't moved when Boone shoved her in the street 2 days ago. Now standing in the dark outside her barn, with a torch, having followed 2 men across the back road to warn her. People surprised you sometimes. Usually when it cost them something to do it. She lowered the rifle. "You came to warn us," she said. "I tried." He looked at the scorched wall. "I was too slow." "No," she said. "You weren't." He looked at her. "You were exactly in time," she said. She looked at Holt's shoulder. He was holding the left arm, slightly, protecting it without announcing it. "How bad?" "Manageable." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. "It'll be sore tomorrow." "Let me see it." He let her look. She'd learned to read injuries from her father. Ranch work taught you that, whether you wanted to learn it or not. She pressed along the collarbone and watched his face. He didn't make a sound. But his jaw went tight. "Bruised," she said. "Maybe worse. You need to keep it still." "I'll keep it still when this is over, Holt. Tomorrow," he said. Quiet. Firm. "We can deal with it tomorrow." She stepped back, looked at the east wall of the shed. Still standing. The fire was out at the base, scorched black. But standing the creature ran on somewhere in the dark. The cottonwoods moved in the night wind. She looked at the stars. Cold and far and indifferent. Then she turned back toward the house. "Come inside," she said to both of them. "I'll make coffee. And then we're going to talk about tomorrow." Inside, the coffee came together while the men sat at the table. Holt held his shoulder still. Dex sat on the edge of his chair, looking like a man who'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross, and was just now understanding what that meant. She poured. Set the cups down. Sat. 3 people at her father's table that was always too big for 2. And suddenly it wasn't too big at all. "Tomorrow," she said. Both men looked at her. "Mall prints before dawn," she said. "Spool distributes before 8. The auction is at 9. She looked at the box. At the mining claim inside it. "Desh doesn't know we have all of this. He knows we found something. He doesn't know how much." "He'll know by morning," Holt said. "When those men don't come back with news, then we need to move faster than he expects." She looked at Dex. "Can you get back to town tonight without being seen?" He thought about it. "Back road by the creek." "Maybe. Go to Malls. Tell him what happened. Tell him to print everything, not just the debt papers. Everything." She paused. "Including what happened tonight." Dex stared at her. "Coal oil," she said. "Deliberate. 2 men. He'll want to print that. Give him your name. He can verify the rest. My name in the paper is the safest place it can be right now." He absorbed this, the logic of it, the terrifying logic of it. "Okay," he said. He stood, picked up his jacket, looked at her. "Miss Graves." He stopped at the door. Something in his face that was younger than 22 right now and older at the same time. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." She looked at him. "You said something now," she said. He nodded. Went out. She listened to his footsteps across the yard. The creak of the gate. Then nothing. Holt was watching her. 2 days ago you were trying to buy flour, he said. 3 days ago, she said. And I never did get the flour. He almost laughed. Almost the lines around his eyes shifted. The shift of a man who hadn't laughed much in 3 years, but remembered how. She drank her coffee. Outside, the damaged barn wall sat dark and scorched against the starlight. The creek ran on. The grass moved in the night wind. Tomorrow. Mole's paper. Spool's deputies. The auction house. The box on the table with its federal mining claim, and its paid receipt, and its evidence of everything Cormac Desh had been building and lying and burning to get. Tomorrow, she was afraid. She would be afraid tomorrow, too, but fear. She'd decided this somewhere between the fire and the coffee. Fear was just information. It told you what mattered, and it told you how much. This mattered, enough to be afraid of, which meant it was worth fighting for. She put her cup down. Get some sleep, she said. Both of us. A few hours, Holt nodded. He stood, without pretending, got to the hallway door. Ruby, she looked up. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her in the street in Deadwood. Not like someone who needed protecting. Something more honest than that. Something that had taken 2 days of watching her to build up to. Your father knew exactly what he had, Holt said. When he put your name on that document, she held that. Let it settle in the way things settled when you really needed to hold on to them. Good night, Mr. Calloway, she said. Good night. She sat alone at her father's table. The papers, the box, the coffee cooling the cup, the creek outside. Tomorrow, she blew out the lamp dawn. The last hour before dawn is the quietest one. Not peaceful, not restful. Just quiet the way a held breath is quiet. The way the moment before a door opens is quiet. Ruby sat at her father's table and did not sleep. She'd tried. An hour, maybe. Lying on top of the covers with her boots still on and her father's rifle against the wall beside the bed. Not sleeping. Just lying there while the dark pressed down on the house and the creek. Ran on outside. And somewhere in the storeroom Holt Calloway was also probably not sleeping. She got up. At 4, made coffee. Sat at the table, with the box, not opening it. Just with it. The way you sit with something that has changed everything, and hasn't finished changing it yet. She thought about her father, Cal Graves, who had gone to Cheyenne in the winter, and come home with a federal document, and put her name on it, and never said a word. Who had sat at this same table, looking at these same hills, and known what was coming, and made his plans, and written his letters, and still not been fast enough. She thought about Holt in the storeroom with a bruised shoulder and a 3-year-old grief he carried like water in a closed jar. Never spilling it, never setting it down, she thought about today. Because the sky outside the window was going from black to that shade of not quite dark that month, and the sun was thinking about it. Today, the auction was at 9. Mull was printing. Spool was getting his 2 deputies ready. Dex was somewhere in Deadwood doing something brave that probably terrified him. And Cormac Desh was somewhere in this town, knowing the walls were moving, feeling it. Men like him always felt it. The atmospheric pressure change that came when something they'd built carefully was starting to come apart at the seams. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, the warmth of it sissable and real. Outside, the sky turned gray. Holt came through the storeroom door at 5. He looked at the coffee, at her, at the window. How's the shoulder? She said, present, which was not the same as fine, but she let it go. He poured coffee, sat, looked at the box on the table. Mull should be done printing by now, he said. I know. Spool's deputies start distribution at 6. I know. We need to be in town before the auction opens. Before Dasheken, he stopped. Looked at her more carefully. You already ran all of this. 3 times. Since 2 in the morning, he nodded. Drank his coffee, the fire in the stove, the gray light coming up, the creek outside, the scorched east wall of the barn. She could just see through the window if she leaned slightly right. There's something I need to tell you, she said. He waited. The plan. She put her cup down. The plan is Mull prints. Spool distributes. We go to the auction. We present the documents. The truth comes out. She looked at her hands. But Desh will be there, and Boone? Yes. And the plan assumes they let the truth come out. That they don't, she stopped. Because she was trying to say something she didn't quite have words for. The specific fear that had been sitting under everything else. Underneath the practical planning. Underneath the document collecting, and the alliance building, and the 2 a.m. arithmetic. The fear that being right wasn't enough. That the truth didn't protect you. That her father had been right and had the proof, and it hadn't protected him at all. Your father made a mistake, Holt said quietly, not in what he did. In doing it alone, she looked at him. He had the proof. He had the plan. But he didn't tell anyone. He kept it contained. Private, a pause. Private is easier to make disappear than public. That's what Mull said. Mull's right. Your father would have agreed with him. He just didn't get there in time. Holt looked at the window. You're not doing it alone. That's the difference. She thought about that. What if it's not enough? She said. He looked at her directly. The full look. The weighted one. Then we figure out what comes after that, he said. But we don't assume it before we get there. She held his eyes for a moment, then she stood up. All right, she said. Let's go to town. They rode in as the sun came fully over the hills. Low, gold. That specific morning gold that made everything look better than it was. The buildings of Deadwood catching it, the storefronts, the window glass. The mud between the tracks going warm copper instead of cold brown. Ruby rode with her back straight. She was afraid. She'd been afraid since April. She'd be afraid for a while yet, probably. But she'd decided, sometime between 4 and 5 in the morning, that afraid was just something she was carrying now. Like her father's rifle across her saddle. You carry it because you need it. That doesn't mean it weighs nothing. The Deadwood Courier building. The sign with the faded D, Deadwood Courier. Except when they rode up. When she could see the front of the building clearly, there was a stack of papers on the doorstep, freshly printed. Still smelling of ink. 20 copies at least, maybe more. And next to them, Prentice Mull. Standing outside his own building in his shirt sleeves at 6 in the morning, with ink on both hands, and his spectacles actually on his face for once. Looking like a man who hadn't slept but had done something he was going to feel good for a long time. I was wondering when you'd get here, he said. Ruby dismounted, picked up one of the papers, the Deadwood Courier. Volume 4, number 38. The headline across the top, Fraud and Forgery. The truth about the Graves Ranch, seizure, and underneath it, mining claim confirmed silver deposits. Dep papers proven false. Witnesses nom. She read it standing on the doorstep in the morning light. Her hands were shaking again. Under her gloves, she read every word. Mull had done it all. The mining claim, the paid receipt, Dex's account of the debt papers being filed with a forged authentication, Spool's statement about the auction order, the incident at the ranch last night, coal oil, arson attempt, 2 men unidentified but described, the implied connection to Boone Pritchard, everything laid out in Mull's careful dry newspaper prose. No drama, no excess, just facts, one after another, until they built into something that could not be looked at sideways and called anything other than what it was. It's good, she said. It's accurate, Mull said. Which was how he gave compliments. The copies are going out now. Spool's men took theirs already. There are copies going to every business on the main street, the land office, and the territorial courthouse. He paused. I also sent 3 copies by rider to the federal post station 2 nights ago. Before you even came to see me. She looked at him. Just in case, he said. She wanted to hug the old man. She didn't. He looked like he'd be startled. Thank you, she said instead. He waved a hand. Ink always on his hands. Thank me after 9 o'clock, 6:30. They had 2.5 hours. Which was when Dex Hooper came running around of the dry goods store. Looking like a man whose morning had not gone the way he'd hoped, he saw them, stopped. Breathing hard, Boone, he said. He knows. Of course he did. He's at the auction hall, Dex said. Desh is already there. They moved everything up. They're trying to open at 7:30 instead of 9. Ruby looked at Holt. Holt looked at the papers in her hand. 2.5 hours had just become 1 hour. How many people know about the change? Holt asked. Nobody. That's the point. Dex was still catching his breath. If they can get through the auction before the papers are distributed. Before people read it, Ruby said. Before anyone can object. Before anyone with authority. Dex stopped. The marshal. Spool said the U.S. Marshal from Cheyenne. Gets here this afternoon at the earliest, Harold said. Right? Too slow. So they needed to stall the auction, or stop it. Or, is Spool at the distribution? Ruby asked. He was when I left. Get him, she said. Now. Tell him they moved the time. Tell him we need him at the auction hall. She looked at Mull. Can you get more papers out to the people who'd show up at an auction? The ranchers. The townspeople. I've got a boy who can run, Mull said. Run fast, she said. She was already moving. The Deadwood auction hall was a large square building on the south end of the main street. Practical. Ugly. Built for function and nothing else. Big enough to hold 200 people if they didn't mind standing close. They could hear it before they could see it. Voices. Muffled. The sound of people gathering somewhere for something important. She counted the horses outside. 15. Maybe 20. Some she recognized. Ranchers from north of town. The Hadley family. The Bertrams. People who'd lost land or knew people who had. People who came to auctions in Deadwood, because Desch's auctions had a way of making opportunities. And if you weren't there, you didn't get one. People who had not yet read the paper, but near the hitching post. A man she recognized as one of Spool's deputies, talking to a woman in a gray dress, pressing something into her hand, a paper. The woman looked down at it, read for a moment. Her head came up. She said something to the man. He pressed more papers into her arms. Distribution. Already here, not fast enough, not nearly, but something. Ruby dismounted. Holt was already down. She could see him managing the left arm without announcing it. Holt, I'm fine, you keep saying that. Keep being true. She looked at him. That face. 45 years old, and worn to its essentials and still here. Stay close, she said. Not asking. Just practical. Where else would I be, he said. They went in. The auction hall was maybe half full. People standing in groups. Some sitting on the benches along the walls. The murmur of conversations that had been going long enough to be comfortable, but not long enough to be settled. At the front of the room, a raised platform. A podium. And standing beside it, talking to the auctioneer in low, quick tones. Cormac Desch. She'd never seen him up close before. 50 maybe. 60 was possible. The kind of man whose age was hard to place because he'd spent it carefully. Silver-haired, well-dressed by Deadwood standards, a gold watch chain across his vest. The self-possession of a man who had never in his life stood in a room where he wasn't the most powerful person in it. He looked up when she came in, looked at her directly. No pretense of not noticing, no show of surprise. Just looked, the way a man looked at something he'd already accounted for, and found less than he'd expected, which, fine, let him think that. Boone Pritchard was to the left of the platform. Arms crossed, eyes moving. He found Holt and stayed on him. Holt found Boone and stayed on him right back. Two men doing math at each other across a room. Ruby walked forward. People moved, not parting dramatically. Just the small shifts that happen in a crowd when someone is walking with particular purpose, and the crowd decides to let them. She got to the middle of the room. Stopped. Desch looked at her. Composed. Certain. The expression of a man who had already imagined this moment, and decided how it ended. Miss Graves, he said. His voice carried easily. Pleasant. The pleasant of something practiced. I'm glad you came. This would have been unfortunate without you present. Yes, she said. It would have been. She reached into her coat, took out the mining claim, held it up, not waving it, not dramatic. Just. Present. Visible my name, she said, is Ruby Eleanor Graves. I am the registered claimant of the mineral rights beneath the Graves property at Deadwood Creek. Filed with the Federal Land Office in February of this year. Under the Mining Act of 1872, Silence. Not complete silence. The crowd murmur didn't stop. It changed quality. Went from general noise to something more directed. Desh looked at the document in her hand. For just a moment. Just one. Something shifted in his face. Not fear. Not collapse. Not the dramatic villain crumble. Just recalibration. The expression of a man running new numbers. Whatever document you're holding, he said, smooth and easy. The debt recorded against this property supersedes any subsequent. The debt was paid. She pulled out the bank receipt. October of last year. Citizens Bank of Cheyenne. Signed. Stamped. Original. She put both documents on the nearest bench. Anyone can read them. She said. To Desh. To the room. To everyone who is now very much paying attention. I'd encourage it. People moved toward the bench. She watched them. A rancher she knew by face. Picked up the mining claim. Read it. His eyebrows went up. A woman in a blue dress. The receipt. Her lips moved slightly as she read. An older man near the back. Already reading the paper someone had pressed into his hands outside. Looking between the paper and the documents on the bench. Nodding slowly, Desh took one step forward. This is highly irregular. What's irregular? Said a voice from the doorway. Is holding an auction you moved up 2 hours without notifying the parties involved. Deputy Ira Spool. Standing in the doorway of the Deadwood auction hall, looking like a man who had decided something this morning and was going to see it through even if his hands weren't entirely steady about it. His badge was on. Straight. He'd put it on straight, Deputy. Desh kept his voice even. This is a civil proceeding. Your presence isn't. My presence is relevant, Spool said. Because I have a complaint filed with the territorial court regarding the authentication of the debt papers used to initiate this seizure. He walked in. Specifically, that they were authenticated by Judge Harker, who is related by blood to Boone Pritchard. He looked at Boone, who works for you. The room was very quiet now, not the held breath kind of quiet from the beginning of the story, different. The kind of quiet that happened when a crowd all landed on the same thing at once, same understanding, same response, which was something between dawning understanding and a kind of anger that had been waiting somewhere looking for a direction. Boone took a step. Holt moved, not toward Boone, just between Boone and Ruby, easy, casual, like a man taking a step in a room, except he was now standing between them and his right hand was relaxed and visible, and his eyes were on Boone in a way that made Boone stop. Don't, Holt said. One word. Boone stopped. Desh looked at the room, at the people, at the documents on the bench, at Spool with his straight badge at Holt standing between Boone and Ruby like a wall that had decided to be a wall, at Ruby, that composed face, still running numbers, still calculating, and then something shifted in it, the calculation, finishing, and the answer not being what he'd expected. He looked at Ruby Graves, 20 years old, standing in the middle of the Deadwood auction hall, with flour still probably in the seams of her boots from the day before yesterday, and her father's coat on her shoulders, and 2 legal documents on a bench that anyone in the room could read, and half of them already were. This isn't over, he said low. Just to her, she looked at him. It is in this building, she said. What happened next was not dramatic. That was the thing about truth coming out. It rarely looked like the stories said it would. No lightning, no collapse, no single moment of revelation. It was gradual, the people reading the documents on the bench, talking to each other, showing each other the newspaper that was now circulating through the room. Faster than anyone had expected, because people had been reading it outside before they came in. Because Mull's boy had been running. Because Spool's deputies had been pushing papers into every hand they could find since 6 o'clock. 2 ranchers from north of town recognized the pattern Mull had described. Debt papers, land seizures, fast auctions. They'd seen pieces of it. Never the whole picture. Now they had the whole picture and they were not happy about what it showed. The auctioneer quietly stepped back from the podium. Judge Harker, who had been sitting near the front attempting to look like a man minding his own business, stood up, straightened his coat, walked toward the side door. Spool's voice. "Judge?" Harker stopped, turned around, looked at Spool with the expression of a man who had always known this day might come and still hadn't made sufficient preparation for it. "I'd appreciate if you stayed," Spool said. "We're going to need to talk about those authentication signatures." Harker sat back down. Boone Pritchard looked at Desh. Desh looked at nothing in particular. His face had gone very still. The stillness of a man who had been outmaneuvered and was deciding his next position. He looked at Ruby once more. She looked back. He walked out. Not running. Desh would never run. He walked out the way he walked in. Measured. Controlled. Like a man leaving a room by choice, rather than being pushed out of it. But he left. Boone followed him, and as they went through the door, two of the men from north of town moved to the doorway and just stood there, not blocking, not threatening, just present. In case, she found Holt outside 20 minutes later. He was sitting on the steps of the building, eyes closed, head back slightly against the post. She sat down beside him, not close enough to crowd him, close enough to be there. He opened his eyes, looked at the street, Deadwood going about its morning business around them, which seemed wrong somehow. Like the world should have noticed that something significant had just happened. But the wagons were still moving, and the piano in the Golden Spur was still bad, and a dog was investigating something interesting near the feed store. Life. Doing what it did. "The marshal gets here this afternoon," she said. "Spool will hold them until then." Harker's already talking, apparently. Dex says he started before they even got out of the auction hall. Men like Harker always talk when they think talking is what saves them, does it? Rarely. Holt shifted carefully. "But it means we'll have what we need for the federal case." She nodded, looked at the street. "Desh won't go quietly," she said. "No, but quietly or not, he'll go." A pause. "He can't stay in Deadwood after this. The entire town just read that paper. The ranchers who lost land, they know now. He doesn't have the protection he had yesterday. That's not the same as gone." "No," Holt said. "It's not." "But it's the start of gone," she thought about that. Start of gone. Maybe that was all you could ask for. Not the clean ending. Not the sudden fix. Just the start of gone. The first crumble in something that had seemed solid. Her father had been dead for 3 months. That didn't change. The start of gone didn't change that. But she looked at her name on the mining claim she still had in her coat. Ruby Eleanor Graves. Claimant of record. He'd given her this. Her father had. Quietly. Alone. In the middle of everything coming apart, he'd gone to Cheyenne and filed papers under her name and come home and kept going. He'd believed she could do something with it. She'd done something with it. "I need to show you something," she said. She reached into her coat, not the mining claim. The other document, the one from the bottom of the box. The one she'd taken out last night after everyone went to sleep and read alone at the kitchen table, with the lamp burning low. She'd been carrying it all morning. She held it out. Holt looked at it, his name on the front. In her father's handwriting. Holt Calloway. Nothing else. He took it, held it for a moment without opening it. The way she'd held the box without opening it. Some things needed a moment. Then he unfolded it. She didn't watch him read. She looked at the street instead. At the dog who had found whatever it was looking for, near the feed store, and was now trotting away very pleased with itself. At the woman in the gray dress who was still talking to Spool's deputy, near the auction hall, animated, pointing at the newspaper in her hand, at Deadwood. Which was still Deadwood, but maybe a little different. She heard the sound of the paper being folded, turned back. Holt was looking at the street, his face. That face she'd been learning for 3 days now, the one that covered things, the one that moved in small controlled ways when the covering slipped a little. It was not covering right now, not completely. The thing underneath was visible, not grief, not joy, something older than both. Calloused palms, the thing that happened when you'd been carrying something for a very long time. Someone unreached over and took some of the weight. He was looking at the street, but she didn't think he was seeing it. She thought he was in Milford somewhere. In a kitchen, maybe. A small house. An 8-year-old boy with dark, quick eyes who named the horses. He told you, she said quietly. About Walt, he said. Holt's voice came out rough. He cleared it. He said he was honored. When I named the boy, a pause. He said it was the most Calgraves thing anyone had ever done for him. Another pause, the long kind. He said to tell me that, tell me. Present tense, even knowing he might not be there to tell it himself. Calgraves had made sure this message got through, had put it in a letter, in a box, under a piece of oilcloth, on a shelf. With his daughter's name on the outside, open when you are ready. She'd been ready this morning. At 4 a.m, sitting alone at her father's table. And she'd read it, and she'd sat with it, and she'd brought it here because some things weren't hers to keep to herself. He forgave you, she said. The letter, he forgives you. For Milford, for not coming sooner. For all of it. Holt looked at the paper in his hand. I know, he said. Very quiet. I can read. I know you can read. I'm saying it out loud because I thought you might need to hear someone else say it. He looked at her. That full look. The weighted one, she met it. Didn't look away. Something passed between them on those steps in the morning light of a Deadwood day that was going to be different from yesterday. Not words. Not anything that had a name exactly. Just the recognition of two people who had both been alone for long enough, that being not alone felt strange and true at the same time. He looked back at the paper, folded it, put it in his coat, inner pocket. Close, your father, he said. Was the best man I ever knew? Yes, she said, he was. They sat there, the street, the dog, the piano, the woman in the gray dress still talking, the wagons. My shoulder is worse than I said, Holt said. She turned to look at him. I know, she said. You knew. You held it wrong when you got on the horse this morning. He looked at her. When did you? I've been watching you for 3 days. You favor the left knee when it's cold, and you hold everything with your right hand when you're trying to look fine and aren't. He was quiet for a moment. You notice a lot, he said. People have been overlooking me my whole life. You pay attention when people aren't paying attention to you. He considered this. That's either very useful or very sad, he said. Today it was useful, she said. Ask me again in a week. Something in his eyes shifted. That near smile again, the one she'd been cataloging. The slight deepening of the lines. The stillness that was the opposite of blankness. A week, he said. Not a question. She stood up, dusted off her father's coat. Come on, she said. Let me look at that shoulder properly. Then we can go back and wait for the marshal. He stood. Slowly, without pretending. She didn't offer her arm. He wouldn't take it if she did. But she slowed her pace to match his. Just slightly. Just enough. He didn't mention it, which meant he'd noticed, which she supposed was fair. The U.S. Marshal arrived at 3 in the afternoon. His name was Aldous Frey, thin man, 50s, the kind of weathered that came from 20 years of riding between territories delivering consequences. He came with 2 deputies and a letter from the Federal Land Office in Cheyenne that had apparently been waiting for someone to give it a reason. He read Mull's paper on the street outside the Courier building. Then he read the documents Ruby gave him. Then he went and had a long conversation with Deputy Spool that she wasn't present for, but could read in Spool's expression afterward. Something between relief and exhaustion, the expression of a man who'd been carrying something alone and had finally been able to put part of it down. Desch was found at his office above the Golden Spur Saloon, not running. She'd been right about that. He wouldn't run. Men like him believed in their own invulnerability too deeply to run. They always thought there was one more angle, one more play. She didn't see the arrest. She was at Mull's when it happened. Mull told her after. Frey and his 2 deputies. Desch walking out with them, that composed face, that gold watch chain, that controlled step, not dramatic, just gone. Boone Pritchard was gone before they went looking for him, which surprised no one. Boone had always been a man who read weather. He'd felt the pressure dropping since morning, and he'd gone. They'd find him. Eventually. Frey said so. These things took time. Judge Harker had been talking since the auction hall and showed no signs of stopping. The immunity conversation with Frey's people had started before lunch. The three families who'd lost land to similar seizures in the past 2 years came to Mall's off on the afternoon, one by one, to look at the documents, to talk to Frey's people, to start the long, complicated process of getting back what had been taken. It wasn't quick, it wasn't clean, it was the beginning of a reckoning that was going to take months, maybe longer, but it was the beginning. Ruby sat in Mull's ink-smelling office and answered questions until her voice went hoarse. Holt sat across from her and answered his questions. Dex Hooper answered his, looking like a man who had expected punishment and kept receiving something else instead. Around 4 o'clock, Mull brought coffee. Just put it on the desk in front of everyone and went back to his press. No fanfare. Just coffee. She looked at the cup, thought about a kitchen table too big for 2 people, about a box on a shelf with her name on it, about flour in the boards, of a Deadwood street and a hand held out and 4 words that had changed everything. Nobody touches her again. Her father had written a letter, had driven 6 days' worth of writing into motion, had trusted a man he hadn't seen in 9 years to come through. He'd come through and he'd stood in a street, and he'd been there for 3 days of this. He was still here. She looked at Holt across the desk. He was talking to one of Frey's deputies, answering something about Milford, about the fire in 1875, about 3 years of following a trail that had finally led somewhere. His face was doing its controlled thing, covering the weight of it, presenting the managed Poulter's surface, but she could see underneath now. She'd learned the underneath. By evening, the streets of Deadwood had that quality of aftermath. The quiet that came after something significant. People moving differently, groups gathered outside businesses talking in low voices. A different texture to the air. The feeling of a story being sorted through, understood, passed along. She and Holt rode north out of town as the sun went low. Same road as before, same hills, same grass, same light, everything the same, except not the same at all. She was thinking about this. About the way the same road could feel different when you'd been down it enough times with different things in your chest. When what you were carrying changed even if the road didn't. What happens to Desh now, she said. Federal charges, Holt said. Land fraud, possibly more. Frey's a thorough man. He'll find what's there. A pause. Milford will be reopened, the case there. After 3 years, yes. Is that? She searched for the word. Is that enough? He rode for a moment without answering. No, he said. It's not enough. Walt was 8 years old. A pause. Nothing is enough for that. Another pause. Longer. But it's what there is. And it's more than I had yesterday. She thought about that. Yesterday she'd been trying to buy flour. Today she had a federal mining claim, a corrupt judge cooperating with marshals, a 22-year-old boy who had chosen right when it mattered, and an old newspaper man who'd printed the truth when someone had finally stood next to him, long enough for him to remember why he still owned a press. Yesterday, today, the same road but not. The ranch came around the curve of the last hill, still tired-looking. Still the leaning fence and the scorched east wall. The cattle near the creek, the main house solid as her father had built it. The cottonwoods moving in the evening breeze, but hers registered. Legal. Federally recognized. Ruby Eleanor Graves, claimant of record. Her father's voice somewhere in the back of her mind. That tone he used when he was pleased about something. Not loudly pleased. The quiet pleased. The deep kind. She rode in through the gate. Tied her horse. Holt tied his. They stood in the yard in the evening light, the creek running past to the north, over whatever was underneath it. The silver ore her father had found with a shovel and a fence post. The thing that had started all of this. What do you do now? She said. With Desh in custody. Holt looked at the creek. Nothing for a while, he said. Give testimony. Talk to Frey's people. Wait for the Milford case to open. That could take months. Yes. She looked at the barn, the east wall, The scorch marks. The east wall needs rebuilding, she said. Not just the outside, the whole section. Father was putting it off before. She stopped. Reset. I've been putting it off. That's a week of work at least. 2 probably. If you're working around a bad shoulder. He looked at her. She looked at the wall. Not at him. The fence on the north pasture is still down, she said. Gate latch needs replacing. And the pump needs a new washer, or we'll lose pressure again next summer. That's a list, he said. It is. That's a month's worth of work at least. At least. She finally looked at him. He was looking at her already. That face, that worn, essential face. 45 years old and still here. Still standing in yards at the end of long days. You're not subtle, he said. I know. Ruby, I'm not asking you to stay forever, she said. I'm asking you to stay until the shoulder heals, and the wall gets rebuilt, and the fence gets fixed. And the marshal doesn't need you in Cheyenne yet. He was quiet. That's a list of reasons, he said. Yes, not all of them are about fences. She held his gaze. No, he looked at the creek, the cottonwoods moving. The last of the sun going orange across the hills. She waited, because this was his decision. She'd made her case. The way her father had made his case. In a letter, in a federal document, and a box on a shelf. Done what you could do. Put your name on it. Left the rest to time and the choices of people you had to trust. Holt reached up with his good hand, uncinched his saddle, lifted it down. Slowly, careful. Set it on the porch rail. You mentioned a pump, he said. I did. I'm not great with pumps, I'll show you, he nodded. Picked up the saddlebags. Walked toward the porch. She stood in the yard for a moment. The creek, the hills going dark. The sound of Holt's boots on the porch steps. The door. Familiar already. 3/8 familiar and already. Something, she didn't name it, too early, too new. The kind of thing you could scare off by looking at it directly. But something. She went inside. That night they ate at her father's table. She'd made stew from what was in the larder. Salt pork and potatoes, and dried beans she'd soaked since morning. Her father's recipe, which was less a recipe than a method. Throw things in. Add water. Wait. Holt ate 2 bowls, which she chose not to comment on. The table between them. The lamp. The box still there. The documents she'd need for Frey's people tomorrow. The letter that was now in Holt's coat pocket where it would probably stay. The creek outside the Nighthawk. Right on time. It's 1 note in the dark. There it is, she said. Holt looked up. The Nighthawk, she said. Every night at this hour. Since, she paused. Since April, actually. I think it moved in after my father died and decided it lived here now. Holt listened. The call again. Distant. Singular. He had good taste, Holt said. She looked at him. He was eating stew, not making a face about it. Just eating. Like a man who'd had enough bad meals that a plain good one was worth appreciating without drama. Something warm moved through her chest, Kie. Unannounced. She looked at her own bowl. Thought about her father sitting in that chair across from her. That big table with papers, spread on the half she wasn't using. Cal Graves with his C and G handwriting, and his specific quiet, and his habit of knowing the right thing and doing it slowly, carefully, in ways that outlasted him. He'd done it again. Had reached across his own death and done it again. She was going to miss him for the rest of her life. That was just true. There was no getting around it or under it or over it. You carry loss. You learn the weight. You keep going not because the weight gets lighter, but because you get stronger, or because you don't get a choice, or more likely both. But she was not alone at this table. And that was her father's last gasp gift. He was right about you, she said. Holt looked up. His letter, she said. He said, come if you can. That I just needed someone to stand next to me long enough. She looked at the window, the dark outside. He was right. Holt was quiet for a moment. He was right about you too, he said. What did he say about me? That you could take care of yourself. A pause. He said that twice. Like he wanted me to be sure I understood it going in. She almost smiled. Did you believe him? By the time I watched you hold a rifle on a man in the dark without your hand shaking. A pause. Yes, her hand had been shaking, under the rifle. But He hadn't been watching her hands. The fire, the lamp, the creek outside. She stood and cleared the bowls. He stood to help and she waved him off, and he sat back down without argument, which she was starting to understand was not deference. It was the same thing she did when she was being practical. Just being practical. She washed the bowls at the basin, listened to him behind her at the table. The sound of papers being arranged. Probably the documents for tomorrow. Organizing the things that needed organizing. Because that was the kind of man he was. "There's something I've been thinking about," she said. "All right." She turned around, dried her hands on the cloth. "The mining claim," she said. "The silver. If it's as significant as my father thought, it's going to bring people, more people, different kind of people." She leaned against the basin. "Deadwood's already that way. More coming, yes. That means this ranch is going to matter in ways it didn't before. And I'm going to need to be ready for that. Legally, practically. All of it. You will be," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to believe I will be. I know I will be." She looked at him. "I'm saying it's going to be complicated and long. And there are going to be other people who try what Desh tried, probably. And I'd rather not be alone when they do." He held her gaze. "I know you can handle it alone," he said. "I know you know that. So that's not what you're asking." "No," she said. "It's not." Quiet the lamp, the creek. The Nighthawk one more time and then done for the evening. "I haven't stayed anywhere," he said slowly. "Since Milford, I know. 3 years of not staying. I know. I don't know if I—" He stopped. "I don't know what I am when I stay somewhere." She thought about that. "I don't know what I am when someone stays," she said. "So we'd be figuring it out together." He looked at the table. The documents, his hands on top of them. Those old scarred hands. "I'm not easy," he said. "Neither am I. I wake up at 3 in the morning. So do I. Holt." He looked up. "I'm not asking for easy," she said. "I'm asking for here." The longest pause yet, the ranch breathing around them. The wood and the stone and the solid good walls her father had built right the first time. Holt looked at the window. The dark, the creek you could hear but not see, and then back at her. "Here," he said. Not a question, an answer. The days that followed were not stories. They were days. The marshal's men came and went with their questions and their documents. The federal case against Desh was opened in Cheyenne. Milford was reopened. Frey was thorough. He had said he was thorough, and he was. Harker lost his judgeship. Boone Pritchard was found 3 weeks later near the Wyoming border. Arrested. Transferred. Dex Hooper stayed in Deadwood. Got different work. Work that didn't require him to carry cases for men he wasn't sure about. His mother did not kill him. She read the paper and sat down and cried a little, and then made him dinner, which he said was better than the alternative. Prentice Mull printed 2 more follow-up stories. The second one made it all the way to a newspaper in St. Louis, which was the furthest Cal Graves' name had ever traveled. Ruby thought he would have liked that. She thought about him every day, not the hurting kind of every day. Or not only that, the regular kind. The kind where someone is gone and you still reach for them in small moments. The sound of a particular bird. The way light hit the creek in the morning. A table too big for 2 people. The east wall of the barn got rebuilt. It took 11 days. Not 2 weeks because Holt's shoulder healed faster than expected, and because he turned out to be very good with timber. Better than he'd suggested. She didn't say anything about the discrepancy. He didn't either. The fence on the north pasture went up clean. The gate latch got replaced. The pump got its new washer, which required more disassembly than either of them had expected, and resulted in a 45-minute conversation about plumbing that was the most mundane and somehow most comfortable conversation she'd ever had. He woke at 3 in the morning sometimes. She could hear him through the wall. She was usually awake too. They started keeping coffee on the back of the stove. Low heat. For 3 in the morning. Neither of them acknowledged this arrangement explicitly. It just became a thing they did. Years later, when people in Deadwood told the story, and they did tell it, it was the kind of story that got told. It started usually with the girl in the dirt, and the flower in the boards, and a stranger stepping off a horse. Nobody touches her again. They told it different ways. Some versions had more gunfire, some had fewer, some had a court scene that never happened. Some had Desh giving a speech on his way out that he absolutely did not give. Stories do that. They grow into the space they need. But the part that always stayed the same, in every version, the part nobody changed, a girl got up off the ground. That part always stayed, because it was the part that was true in a way that outlasted the details. True in the way that things are true when they touch something, in people that wants to remember them. A girl got up off the ground and held on to what was hers and let someone stand beside her when he offered, and stood beside him when he needed it, and built something in the space where terrible things had happened. Which was, if you thought about it, the most ordinary miracle there was, and the most necessary. The creek ran north through the Graves property, past the cottonwoods that moved in every kind of weather, past the ranch that Calhoun Graves had built solid and right and left to his daughter, past the fence that finally stood straight on the north pasture, past the barn with its new east wall, clean timber, no scorch marks, into the hills, carrying whatever it carried. Water does not ask permission. It finds the way through and it goes. And somewhere underneath it, in the formations that had been there since before, Deadwood was a name for anything the ore her father had found, sat where it had always sat, waiting, patient. 6 weeks after the day at the auction hall, she was at the creek, late afternoon, the light going long. That amber that came in September when summer finally let go. She was sitting on the flat rock above the place her father had been fixing a fence post. When his shovel hit something that didn't sound like rock, she'd been coming here in the evenings lately, not looking for anything, not doing anything, just sitting with it. The water, the rock, the knowledge of what was underneath. She heard boots on the bank. Holt came and sat beside her, not close enough to crowd, close enough to be there. The way he always did it. They looked at the creek. Phrase, man came by today, she said. I saw him. They want testimony in Cheyenne. Next month, probably. Both of us, I know. Long ride. We've done long rides. She looked at him sideways. He was looking at the water, that face. She knew it now. All of it. The 3 in the morning version, and the working in the yard version, and the talking to marshals version, and the sitting by the creek version. She knew the underneath, too, had learned it slowly. The way you learned things that were worth learning, not all at once, a little at a time, given by someone who'd kept things close for long enough that the giving took effort. She didn't push, she waited, she learned. He'd been learning her too, she could tell. My father used to sit here, she said. I know. He wrote about it. A pause. In one of his early letters, before things got bad. He said the creek had the best light in the territory. In September, she looked at the water's September light, her father sitting on this rock thinking about what was underneath. The silver ore, the meaning of it, the danger, and still taking a moment to notice the light. He did love a good light, she said. Yes, she reached into her coat. She'd been carrying something for a week now. Deciding when to give it, she held it out. A small thing. River smooth stone, gray, flat, from the creek bank below the rock. The kind of stone her father used to collect. He had 3 on the kitchen windowsill. She'd kept them there. Holt looked at it, took it, turned it in his hand. It's just a rock, she said. I know. From here, I know what it is. She looked at the water. I thought you might like something that was from here, she said. Something to keep. For when you're... She paused. For when you're away, he held the stone, looked at it. I'm not planning on being away, he said. She looked at him. I'm just saying, he said. In case that wasn't clear, she looked back at the water. Something warm and quiet moved through her. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind they put in stories. Just the real kind. The kind that settled in the bones instead of the chest. Warm and quiet. And going to be there tomorrow, too. It's clear, she said. They sat at the creek. The amber light the rock in his hand. Below them, underneath the water and the stones and the years of it, silver ore, in a formation that would take 3 years to properly survey and document, and develop, and turn into something. That would bring more people and more attention, and more complications that they would navigate one at a time. That her father had found alone on a cold November morning, while fixing a fence post, and had quietly protected for his daughter. Above it, on a flat rock in September light, 2 people who had both lost the thing that mattered most and were still here, still sitting, still. The nighthawk called once in the distance. She was looking forward to hearing it again tomorrow.